I started recording this, so the stage is yours.
Okay, good afternoon everyone and welcome to my presentation. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Mikhail Tsagri for his invitation. My name is Anastasios Piatsikas and as you can see, I'm going to talk to you about predicting short success in NBA. Why is this important? Well, if you're anything like me, you may be able to stop losing at betting. Here's some information about my background. I currently work as a data scientist at eWorks, and I also have a master's degree in business analytics and a bachelor in statistics, both earned from the Athens University of Economics and Business. Let's start with the main objectives of our study. So, the main limitations faced in previous studies that attempt to predict short success were related to the data used in their analysis. In this regard, we decided to create a large dataset from an entire NBA season and with many features extracted from various data sources, thus enabling the multipurpose usage of our data. Our main goal was to identify the best method for predicting short success. During this quest, we also gained insights regarding the factors affecting shooting effectiveness. Our research was initially conducted for all types of field goals, and then we focused on 2-point and 3-point shots separately. Here's a quick overview of what we will be covering today. We will start with a brief introduction about the NBA, and then continue with the data preparation process. In Chapter 3, we will present some visualizations from the NBA's 2014-15 season. Then, we're going to describe our methodology, and in Chapter 5, we will apply the same methodology for 2-point and 3-point shots separately. Finally, we're going to close by stating the major findings and with some concluding remarks. So, as a brief introduction, basketball was invented in 1891 by James Naismith, who set 13 simple rules on how the game should be played, which for the most part are valid till today. The game grew immensely popular during the 20th century, with the NBA being founded on 1946. The adoption of the three-point line back in 1979 completely changed the game of basketball. For instance, 5 years after being adopted, teams averaged only 2.4 shot attempts per game, while today, Steph Curry alone averages 6 times more. Since 2013, NBA has been using a 6-camera system to collect tracking data. StatsPerform was the main video tracking provider up until 2017, before switching to Circle Spectrum. So, we reach today where NBA is currently the third wealthiest sports league with an annual revenue of about $10 billion. Per Michael Jordan, NBA is the strongest professional sports league in the world. Let's now proceed to the second chapter concerning data preparation. First of all, for predicting shot success, I guess we need data related to shots. So, we decided to use shot tracking data collected with Sport UV tracking technology. However, as of 2016, NBA has restricted public access, which is why we acquired our data for the previous season from NBASavant.com. Assuming also that shot success can be affected by many factors, we also included play-by-play data using the Hoopar package, along with a variety of features such as total and per-game stats, player bios, and team rankings. The latter three were acquired from multiple data sources like Basketball Reference, B-Ball Index, and NBA.com. For easier understanding, we organize the data processing into 6 major sections. First, we begin with the shot location and shot type segmentation. using the provided X and Y coordinates in our data, we computed the shooting distance and the angle of the shooter position. This enabled us to divide the court into multiple shooting zones. In our analysis, we split the court into 5 main zones, as illustrated in the figure on the left here. We also distinguish the shot location between the left, center, and right side of the court. Furthermore, we divided shots into shooting types like jump shots, layups, and dunks. Now, for quantifying the defensive pressure, we use the closest defender distance. We discovered that the most effective grouping was based on 2 feet distance ranges, which equals to 0.6 meters. For example, if the defender was within 2 feet of the shooter, we characterize the situation as having high defensive pressure when attempting a shot. Whereas, if the defender's distance was between 4 and 6 feet, we categorize it as low defensive pressure. We also...
Can I ask questions during the presentation?
Yes, of course.
Okay. If you don't mind, can we move one slide back? So first of all, here I see that corner covers parts of the court that are beyond the corner. Is that correct? So it covers also stuff that is, yes. That part. So if I understand well, these people care about the corner because it's supposed to be closer to the hoop.
Yes, it is closer to the hoop than the above the breakthrough.
Yeah, but this closer to the hoop condition holds for the corner itself and not for the rest of the green area you have here. So you have a part of the green area which is in fact further than the hoop. So did you choose these colors and these zones following previous research, or is this the way you prefer to
no, I followed previous research, and especially this is how the NBA use it to consider what is considered as the corner 3. It's not.
I'm just wondering.
My selection.
No. I see. Okay, and I try to understand if it would make sense to measure distance with feet. That's it, without having colors for the specific regions, and say that you are close, you are very close, you are extremely close, and you are just under the hoop.
Yes,
so I understand that this is the way they do it, so that's why you do it this way.
This is a typical way.
Okay.
In my analysis, I also use the per 5 feet or per 8 feet distance ranges, which is also used if you see NBA.com.
Okay.
But I decided to show this because this is the typical way people understand the basketball, the paint, the corner 3.
No, but if I am close to the basket, I can be in the mid-range or in the paint, depending on my angle towards the hoop, correct? So my distance does not mean that I am in the pink area and not in the blue, and vice versa.
Of course. This is just a visualization.
Okay. And about the next page where you talk about defense, here you just count the distance between the defender and the player with the ball?
Yes, when the player attempts a shot.
Do you have any information about who that player is? So is this a mismatch? Is this my main defensive opponent? For instance, I might be very close to a very tall guy that in fact I can pass very easily. So in that case, even if we are very close, I have an advantage against this person. So even if the distance is close, this doesn't mean that I am defended well.
Yes, that's correct. I also measure the mismatch. I'm going to talk about it in 3 slides.
Okay, great. Excuse me for that. Thanks.
Okay. So, we also quantified the mental pressure of a player when attempting a shot based on whether his team is leading or trailing and to what extent at every moment of the game. We now continue with the time-related information in our data. As a reminder, the shot clock in the NBA lasts 24 seconds at maximum. So, by grouping the time remaining on the shot clock into 5-second intervals, we characterize the possession type based on when the shot was attempted. We also use the game clock as indication of the player's fatigue and to see whether a shot was attempted in clutch time, which refers to the final 5 minutes of a game, where it's within 5 points or less. Based on how long a player touched the ball before shooting, we were able to distinguish, for example, the ball hoggers into a separate category, which we named after James Harden for obvious reasons. In NBA circles, a term commonly used is the hot hand, meaning that a player is on a streak of making many consecutive shots. To review whether a player is hot when attempting a shot, we check the result of his last 5 shots. Using this information, we computed for each player the number of consecutive shots made during a game and when attempting a shot, and the corresponding percentage. Finally, we include information related to each player's height, weight, and speed. This allowed us to identify whether the shooter was taller, heavier, or quicker than his closest defender, and by what amount. Using this information, along with the shooting distance we previously mentioned, we measured the size of a mismatch. So we see that the mismatch is not only about height difference, but there'll also be a speed attribute depending on when on the court a player attempts a shot. From our exploratory data analysis, we observed that dunks were by far the most effective shooting type, with more than 90% of them being made, as you can see in here. As a result, we decided to exclude all the dunks from our analysis to avoid any potential problems, such as overfitting. Okay, let's now continue.
Tasso, may I interrupt you about this? When you say 9% of the dunks were not made.
Were made.
No, you say 9% were not made.
Okay, yes.
Does this include bad dunks or it also includes blocks?
No, the blocks are a separate category.
Okay.
This just includes all the dunks that were missed.
Okay.
Okay, so we continue with chapter 3. In this plot, we showcase the field goal percentage per shooting distance. As you can see, from the first 2 bars, we see that shots attempted close to the basket are affected the most when contested, with defenses being able to prevent 20% of them. This explains the tendency of many teams to protect the rim at all costs. It is also clear that as shooting distance increases, shot probability decreases. With that in mind, we reviewed how the shooting distance affected each player's shooting effectiveness. Regarding Kyle Korver, we observed that despite the fact that over 75% of his shot attempts were 3-pointers, and on a high volume, as shown by the size of the bubble, he was able to convert more than 47% of his shots, the highest among any other 3-point specialists. We also see that DeAndre Jordan led the league in field goal percentage. The main reason for this lies in his shot chart, which shows that almost all of his shot attempts were under the basket, with an average distance equal to the size of a pizza. We also investigate how the shooting efficiency is affected by the time left on the shot clock. Regarding the 2-point shots, we see that players tend to shoot a lot better, as you can see here, when more time is left on the shot clock. These shots tend to be easier, as they likely occurred during a fast break or after an offensive rebound. On the other hand, the shot clock did not seem to affect three-pointers, as we see that the shooting percentages were relatively stable, with the worst ones occurring here near the end of the shot clock. This is usually the result of a good defense. Regarding the three-point shots, we discovered that the most effective was the corner three. For those who don't know, the red areas here and here, as we previously showed, represent the corner three. And any three-pointer attempted from the area from here to here is considered as an above the break three. So, apart from being closer to the basket, we noticed that players converted 38.6% of corner threes, which is about 5% higher than the above the break threes. In addition, we've seen that defenses have a greater impact on above the break threes, with contested corner threes being made at a 6.2% higher rate. Sticking with the three-pointers, we differentiate three-point shots based on whether they are catch and shoot, meaning that a player shoots without dribbling, or a pull-up. Regarding the catch and shoot specialists, we see that the Splash Brothers, namely Steph Curry and Klay Thompson, had among the highest field goal percentages, despite shooting at a high volume. As for the pull-up threes, we see that the best shooter, both in frequency and accuracy, was Steph Curry, followed by James Harden. In general, catch and shoot is considered a much easier shot than the pull-up. Nevertheless, Steph Curry knocked them down at nearly the same rate. No wonder he became the NBA's all-time leader in three-pointers. We also highlighted the best and worst shooters per shooting zone for that season. What's striking is that the point guard, Chris Paul, was the most effective scorer from the paint. As for the least effective shooters, we see that Russell Westbrook justified the Westbrook nickname by shooting a league-worst 30% from the mid-range. As you may have realized so far from my comments about Westbrook and Harden, I am a big fan of Los Angeles Clippers.
Can I ask a question, not about your team, but about these two graphs or tables or whatever? So you say that you count people with 100 shots per zone and 150 in the paint.
Yes.
Did you try 200 and 300 or 50 and 75 or something? So do you think that 100, 150 are representative, or the picture is different if we allow for more shots?
I tried the relevant, a lot of number of shots as a minimum threshold, okay. But this is a typical separation followed by Kerr Goldsberry in his shot charts, which is why I use this to showcase it.
Okay, because in these two, there are names that are not exactly people that get a lot of minutes. So Jason Smith, for instance, he was not one of the 5 players that his team used to play regularly. Perhaps he was a backup. The same with Schumpert. I don't know if he plays anymore. So I see some players, particularly to the right, that are 6th players or even 7th players. So they are not among the ones that start the game. I'm wondering if this is something that...
Yes, but in the NBA, the 6 or 7 or 8 player plays about 20 minutes per game, which through a season is a very good amount to showcase it.
Yeah, but I would like to see, for instance, how many minutes did Russell Westbrook had that season and Devin Harris. I am pretty sure that Russell Westbrook had like twice as much.
Yes, of course. But as I said, this is only to showcase based on Kerr Goldsberry thresholds. We could also review it per 2000, per 300. It is very easy to do so.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. So we wrap up with offense. Let's now move on to the defensive side of the ball. A famous quote says that offense wins games, but defense wins championships. To measure the defensive ability, we computed for each player the opponent's field goal percentage and the opponent's points per possession. We also calculated the average distance of a player when guarding a shot and the average shooting distance to identify whether a player defends close or away from the basket. Finally, we kept track of how many shots were attempted against each player and how many of them were contested. So, in order to identify the best defenders, we showcased on the y-axis the opponent's points per possession and compared them to the rest of the metrics. Note that in order to avoid having small sample sizes influencing our results, we only include players who guarded at least 200 shots. After comparing our results, we observed that among the best defenders in the league were players like Anthony Davis, Tony Allen, and Draymond Green. We also noticed that the combination of length and agility of some players allowed them to quickly recover and contest shots from a greater distance. In the right plot, we see that from the players that could do this, the most effective ones were Tony Allen, Anthony Davis, and Serge Ibaka, which especially for the latter two, who are power forwards standing at 2.10 meters tall, is pretty impressive. Now, considering...
Sorry, can I ask something again?
Yes.
Sorry for interrupting all the time, but this is interesting. So, do you account for the fact that I might be a good defender because I am defending opponents of lesser value? So if I am not playing in the starting five, I guess I will face weaker attackers, and this will imply that I am a better defender, which is not necessarily true. So basically, an average defender that plays in the starting five might be a better defender than a very good defender that does not play in the starting five, exactly because he has to face better opponents.
Okay, this is a very good comment, but to account for this is why we set a minimum of 200 shots. Also in the NBA, it depends on the minutes played. For example, the good players would play over 30 minutes per game in a good team, which is why those considered good defenders, such as Tony Allen or Draymond Green, have to play the same amount of minutes and potentially match up with the good players to prevent them from scoring.
Yeah. In any case, I would like to see the same tables, but with these defenders playing against the starting five of the opponents,
yes,
something like this, but not necessarily against the secondary squad.
Yes. In a future analysis, we could do so very easily.
That's great. Thanks.
Okay. Now, considering that defender's effectiveness can differ significantly depending on his position and role, a typical defense separation refers to rim protection and perimeter defense. Rim protection is considered the cornerstone of a team's defense. That's because when perimeter defense fails, the rim protector can be there to back it up. So, by focusing on the players guarding shots only in the restricted area, we see that the best rim protectors during that season were DeAndre Jordan and Pau Gasol. What's interesting is that in contrast with the rest of the players in this list, Pau Gasol was mostly known for his offensive ability and was not perceived as a good rim protector. Now, as a tribute to LeBron James, Mikhail Tsagris's favorite player, who became the NBA's all-time leading scorer, we've also included his shot chart and compared his field goal percentage per shooting zone to the league average. The redder the color in this chart, the better LeBron shot compared to the rest of the league. So we see that the most red color is under the basket. Thus, confirming his dominance in the restricted area. We see also that he is very good at shooting the mid-range from the center of the court, the corner three from the left, and the above the break three from the right. We also wanted to see who were the most effective defenders against LeBron James. To do so, we looked at the players that forced LeBron to shoot under 40%. From the players that guarded him the most, we see that the best ones were Jimmy Butler, who was closely followed by Andre Iguodala and Draymond Green, all of whom are considered elite defenders in the NBA.
Sorry again, can I ask something? Okay, so here you are saying that LeBron was not shooting very well.
Against these players.
Okay, do you have any data about LeBron's assists in these games? Because if I don't need to shoot and I can find free players easily, I will not score, not because you guard me well, but because I don't need to. So it would be interesting to see how many assists he had playing against these people.
Yes, that's a very good point. But while analyzing the data, Jimmy Butler, those three players, mostly guarded LeBron not only during the regular season, but only during the playoffs. This is why there are so many shots attempted against them. And during the playoffs, LeBron took a lot of shots. And his assist number may also be high, but he took a lot more shots compared to the regular season.
No, I understand, but here you are saying they are LeBron stoppers and you are checking only his shooting, whereas at offense is not only shooting. So perhaps he can create points for his team without shooting.
Yes,
and
I know.
I'm wondering if you can capture that. That's
yes,
it.
I know.
I know you know. I'm sure you know. But
okay. We can capture this, but just explain my rationale. This is only. We can
that's
also
great. Okay.
show this. Okay. Okay, enough with the plots. Let's continue with the more technical, describing a methodology. Okay, since we want to predict essentially whether a shot is made or missed, we understand that we face a binary classification problem. Prior to our analysis, we randomly split our data into three subsets. In particular, we used 70% of them as the training set to fit its model, and 15% as the test set for hyperparameter tuning and model evaluation. The rest 15% were the validation set, which we used to obtain an unbiased evaluation of the best models fit. To assess the performance of our models, we use the confusion matrix to compute several evaluation metrics. Now, considering that the NBA is a make or miss league in the sense that teams wins or lose games by making or missing shots, we deemed that the cost of false positives and false negatives was essentially the same in our analysis. This is the reason why we decided to use the F1 score as our main evaluation metric. So, we developed 6 different classification models. Note that the implementation of naive-based and tree-based models did not demand scaling their features. However, for the less classification models, namely KNN, linear probability, and logistic regression, we scale their features as these algorithms are sensitive to the variance in the data. Okay, we now move on to how we identified the best classification method. As already discussed, we have randomly split our data into 3 subsets. This procedure was repeated multiple times to decrease the uncertainty of an unfortunate split. So, by computing the mean value of the performance metrics from all these iterations, we evaluated our models. After comparing these metrics and checking the stability of our models, the logistical regression seemed to perform better, with Random Forest being a close second. We then implemented this model in the validation set to see how it performs on unseen data. So overall, our results indicated that the best method was logistical regression. Let's now head to chapter 5. From this graph, we see that the number of three-point shot attempts has increased every year for the past decade. The main reason for this lies in its efficiency, as teams have realized that by shooting more threes, they could score more points, and in the spacing created on the floor. In a recent analysis, it was observed that three-point shooting is determining who wins and who loses games more than ever before. Based on the foregoing, we applied the same methodology to predict shot success for 2-point and 3-point shots separately. After the overall evaluation of our models, we conclude that the best method for predicting shot success of both 2-point and 3-point shots was logistic regression. Time for the final part of our presentation, because all good things must come to an end. Okay, the accuracy benchmark, along with results from previous studies, were used as a point of reference for comparing our results. So, not only were we able to increase the predictive accuracy, but more importantly, we achieved very high F1 scores, which, as mentioned, was our main evaluation metric. Now, our analysis revealed that there was not a clear-cut factor that determined a shot success, but there were some factors with a greater influence. In this plot, the most important indicators are the ones at the top. So we see that shot success is highly influenced by spatial-temporal aspects, mainly the shooting distance, and by each player's shooting abilities. In general, if someone wants to predict shot success, he needs features collected during the game, field goal percentage stats collected from an entire NBA season, and other metrics referring to each shooter's and defender's abilities. We extracted the blue ones from the B-Ball index we mentioned at the start of our presentation. Feel free to check it out. When we focused on three-point shots now, we discovered that the success was mainly affected by each player's field goal percentage per shooting zone. We also observed a significant shift in importance between the rest indicators, which were related to the score difference, the time left on the shot clock, and to metrics indicating defensive-only abilities. What's interesting is that the least influential variable was the time a player held the ball before shooting. A real-life example highlighting this is Klay Thompson, a three-point specialist who was able to score 60 points while holding the ball for just 90 seconds. Moving on to the two-point shots, we discovered that the success was mostly influenced by the shooting zone, and in particular, the shooting distance. Other factors highly influencing the success of two-point shots were the defensive pressure, the possession type, each player's shooting ability, and the score difference. To a lesser extent, two-pointers were influenced by the offensive and defensive role of each player, the shooting angle, and the number of dribbles made before shooting. Finally, the lowest impact on their success had factors like the difference in speed between the shooter and his closest defender, the hot hand, and other seasonal stats such as the usage and true shooting percentage. So we see that the hot hand had indeed some influence on shot success, but not as much as many players or basketball fans believe it to be. So our study could assist coaches and general managers in better understanding the players' abilities and shot selection at every moment of the game. As a result, it could help with in-game strategy by creating efficient game plans and lineups, and with roster construction by acquiring players complementary to a team's needs. It could also help in adjusting players' training regimes to improve their ability to make or defend shots. Finally, in our analysis, we have excluded the player identities, which could help in obtaining a generic player's shooting performance and comparing it to that of a certain player. So, where can we actually take this? From a data standpoint, we could analyze the multiple NBA seasons and use more tracking data to determine, for example, whether the defender was in front, behind, left, or right from the shooter, or whether the shooter was guarded by multiple defenders, or even the defensive switches during a possession. It would also be interesting to know whether the defender raised his arm when contesting a shot, as this would increase the shot's difficulty, and if the defender was in foul trouble when guarding a shot. We could also investigate the player's fatigue during and between games. From a more technical standpoint, we could use another data splitting method, experiment with more classifiers, like XGBoost, for example, or generally add more variations to our analysis. Here are some references. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Tassos. Thank you.
That was great. Michael, can I?
Yes, of course.
Okay. Can we go back to the slide about shot tension? Like 3 slides ago. Yeah, the shot tension, you just passed it.
Sorry?
I think it's in to the right.
Okay.
Here. No, even further. So you have shot tension here, and you said that. So what was the argument about the two pointers? Shot tension is important, but in what direction?
What direction do you mean?
I have the impression that here the story would be, if I am very pressed, so I don't have enough time to shoot, or my team is trailing, then I will take a shot with a smaller success percentage, exactly because I am stressed. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay, so this is the direction you found. So the higher the tension, the lower the percentage.
Yes.
Okay. I'm asking this because some players, at least, they are supposed to be affected by tension in the opposite way. So you have the Jimmy Butlers of this world, and they play better under tension.
Yes.
So the more tense I am, the higher is my percentage because I have this hero sentiment.
Yes.
Damian Lillard. I wanted to know if you found something like this, if you found it for Jimmy Butler, if you found it for other people.
This is why we separate in our data the clutch time, which, as I mentioned, refers to the final 5 minutes of a game, which is within 5 points or less. And we check it and saw that Jimmy Butler, you mentioned, Damian Lillard, and I don't recall the other players. Okay. There were indeed some players that perform way better when it's clutch time.
No, but even before clutch, perhaps my team is behind with 20 points and I manage to, make the difference smaller, even if it's not in the last 5 minutes. So this.
Yes, but usually the tension grows higher during the final minutes of the game.
Yeah, and can you say something more about the hot hand? So there is this myth about the hot hand? Some people say it doesn't exist. Some other people say it does exist and the original studies were wrong. So what is your point about the hot hand phenomenon? Does it exist?
It depends. The hot hand is mostly a mental thing about players. I've also seen some studies in the literature that prove that it did not exist, and others claiming it exists. My research showed that it had some slight influence on two-point shots, but not very much. So I don't have a clear answer about this, but from what I've seen, it has a very slight influence. But as with all metal things, we can't measure this, how exactly it's influenced. Other players may be influenced because they believe it so high.
Exactly. Okay. Mikhail, sorry for monopolizing the conversation.
No, Dimitri. Does anybody have any other questions? Then,
can I ask one more?
yes, of course. Then
so Tassos, what can we learn from this research of yours? Like, is there something that you find that you did not expect or you did not find in other works? What is unique here?
What's unique here, from what I've seen, very few have used the shot location data for each shot. So these factors such as the score difference or the defensive pressure, how close the player is when guarding a shot, or from at what point, or the exact position or time on the clock, or as I mentioned, the mismatch in speed or the high differential depending on the court side, or the player role from People Index. It was the only site that I find a very good clustering of players inside the roles, which is why I said feel free to check it out. So I believe there was a good insights by my
absolutely
research.
But I was asking for the headline. If there is one thing, what is it?
I believe that the player role and the defensive pressure based on the close distance and the mismatch I mentioned was the key highlights. And I was also struck by Pau Gasol being proved as a very good defender, which I didn't expect as well.
Yeah, in fact, I checked the defensive players of that year, the best defensive players, and he's not in the best defensive All-NBA team.
I believe even if we asked him, he would not say I was the best defender during that season.
He was in the All-NBA second team, but in the two defensive teams, he's not in. In fact, the best defender that year was Kawhi Leonard, and I don't remember seeing him in your tables. I remember Tony Allen, but
yes, because when analyzing the data, I saw that Kawhi Leonard played. If I recall correctly, I think he not played all the games during that season. He missed a couple of them. Which is why I guess based on the frequency, he didn't defend as many shots. So he may be not satisfied our minimum threshold criteria.
Which is ridiculous if he got the defensive player of the year award. But okay. And two last things, if I can. So the first is that there is a new way to defend right now, which is even if you are very far from your opponent, you just raise your hands and thankfully you hide the rim. So even if you are very far from the opponent, you might provide some defense still. So perhaps you would like to see, even if a defender is very far, but with raised hands, even if this plays a role in the shot accuracy. And the second thing is that since you support the Clippers,
I don't support the Clippers. It was clear irony. I just don't like the way Harden and Westbrook plays, and they can't play for the Clippers.
Yeah, exactly. So I would be very sorry for you if you support the Clippers. But since you don't, just keep in mind that the owner of the Clippers, Steve Ballmer, is building a new arena now, right?
Yes.
And to the best of my knowledge, he is the Microsoft guy, Steve Ballmer. And he was saying that we will have the opportunity to witness the games through the eyes of the players, thanks to a technology that will be available in the stadium. So basically, he said that we will have cameras all over, and we will be able to present the game through the eyes of Chris Paul, or through the eyes of Kawhi, or through the eyes of whatever. So if you have this kind of data, I guess your work will be much easier, at least for the games that take place in the Clippers Stadium.
Of course, and we have a lot more variables and other features to check into. So
Yeah,
even our models could improve significantly using such information.
Mm-hmm. Okay, again, thanks, and sorry for monopolizing.
No. It was very interesting and very good points.
Tasso, I wanted to ask, I cannot believe, I mean, you showed it, but I'm still struggling to believe that logistic regression performed better than KNN and random forest.
KNN is not, I don't think it's generally considered a good algorithm, especially in our data, since we did not only had continuous variables, but also have a lot of categorical ones, which were converted to be continuous in order to be applied. So I mostly use it as a comparative analysis. Not about random forest, it was really close with logistic regression, and only due to a very slight difference to the standard error, I chose the logistic regression as the best one. But both random forest and logistic regression were very good as an algorithm.
One more thing then, since you didn't mention this. You didn't perform any variable selection.
Yes, I performed, for example.
No, I mean, during the cross-validation, did you say, in the training set, cross-validation, then test with the best variables and so on?
Yes. For the algorithms that we could do some variable selection, for example, in the regression models, we use, for example, either stepwise procedure or to select the best variables. And for the random forest, there's a recursive feature elimination method to select the best variables. So yes, we did indeed make some variable selection before applying our models. We also had a lot of variables. So if we just filter all the variables inside them, the models will take a lot of time to run.
And you said that since 2016, the NBA stopped providing access to this type of data.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Very bad for us.
Yes, indeed. The only solution is, as I mentioned, nbasavant.com for those interested in downloading such data.
And you are saying that this site has more data than the basketball reference?
It has the location of each shot. So I use this site.
Yeah, but does it have it now, the present, last year's?
Yes, no. It has only for the season I presented, 2014-15.
Now, if we go to NBA Savast, this.com,
yes,
we see more data than basketball reference.
Basketball reference does not have a shot location data. It only has other stats, like the points. NBA Savant does not have these stats. It only has the location of each shot and when it was attempted during the game. So this is the reason why I combined the data from NBA Savant to Basketball Reference, NBA.com, and other sites in order to have a very good database. Okay, yes, the data cleansing was a nightmare, as you can imagine.
I never do that. I have other people doing it for me. I explain the process and they do it. Okay, Tassos, I think there are no more questions. So again, thank you for this very interesting talk.
Thank you as well for inviting me. I hope you liked it.
Oh, yes, now I understood it better. It was from a closest distance.
And we also had more time, so I didn't have to rush things.
Yes, it was more clear now. Okay. Thank you, Tassos. Thanks everybody for being here with us today. And Tasso, I plan to invite another guy. If you remember a Spanish or a Mexican guy who spoke about minimizing the distances.
Yes, I remember.
The travels.
Yes.
I will
it was very interesting as well.
Yes, but I plan to invite him next year.
Okay.
February or March. But I will advertise it again on LinkedIn, so you will see it.
Okay.
Will it be basketball again?
Yes, basketball. Yes.
Great. Okay.
That guy has an idea how to minimize the distances covered by each team through the 82 game period.
That's nice.
Instead of flying from the west to the east, minimize the distances.
Okay, I see. Not the players on the court, but the flights.
No, the flight
nice.
Distances.
Very nice. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, interesting. I will be here.
I will be here as well.
Okay.
Thanks, Michalis.
Okay, thank you everybody. Tassos, thanks again. I wish you all a happy afternoon.
You too. Have a nice day, everyone.
Yes, okay.
Thanks. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.